Stranger in a Strange Land, the 9th episode of season 3 of Lost, often gets the reputation of being the worst episode of an otherwise pretty amazing show. I don't think it deserves that bad of a reputation, but yeah, it's not good. It has some pretty great scenes, but overall, yeah, there's some big issues there. Mostly that weird flashback and the tattoo meaning overall, but we'll get to it. I do feel like there are other Lost episodes that are worse though. Personally, I would rank them lower, and maybe I'll talk very quickly about them in the end. But yeah, Stranger in a Strange Land is often a topic of conversation, and well, I have a lot of thoughts about it. So I thought we would have a less video essay type video and more just a casual chat kind of thing. I definitely think it's worth looking at the positives of the episode first, because a bad Lost episode is like a pretty good episode of many other shows. Stranger in a Strange Land actually does a lot of things well, especially regarding subtle character dynamics or overall lore building, and also helping us understand the others better, like why did they kidnap those kids or what do their rules mean. And the episode does a good job shifting our views on them as purely villainous. The episode has great moments, I promise. But then we also have to look at the things that make people dislike the episode so much. Because, yeah, they're pretty fair points that I do agree with. I didn't want to just complain about the negatives of the episode though. I wanted to fix them. Let me solve this problem, right? Because I actually think there's one easy fix and then one change that would have made Stranger in a Strange Land be a much more well-liked episode. What's interesting is that this change would happen in season 6. Yes, my plan for this is not even to change the episode itself, but to connect it to the grander narrative by calling back to it at a specific point in season 6, the last season. Stay with me because we will get there. I promise it will make sense. And if I can say so myself, I actually think my fix is a pretty decent one. So yes, others, Oceanics, friends and foes, let's have a chat about Stranger in a Strange Land, the episode mostly about Jack's tattoos. Oh, and definitely watch my video of the time I designed the concept for a whole theme park based on Lost. It's pretty fun, and see my Lost playlist for more video essays about the show. As of right now, there are none, but there are others in the works. 1. The big positives of the episode. So, what are the things that Stranger in a Strange Land actually succeeded in doing? From enriching character dynamics to giving us important pieces of lore, there are definitely a few big positives. People might miss them because the flashier moments are the bad ones, which is a shame because what the episode does bad, it does. But that's a shame because what this episode does well, it does really well, especially for the perceptive viewers. So the first one is a very quick positive, but we get another glimpse at how the relationship between Ben and his daughter Alex is strained, and we can see how this is actually a new development for them. We don't know yet at this point in the show why there's conflict between them, and it's mainly that he's keeping her away from her boyfriend because he's terrified that she'll get pregnant since that means death on the island. But we don't know that yet, we're just seeing the cracks in the relationship at this point. And a moment that caught my eye when I was watching was a moment when she walks in to talk to Jack. She kind of totally ignores her dad, who is lying down and healing from a major surgery, though she does give him a bit of a significant glance, and he just ducks his head like down into the bed, like it hurts him that she's not even asking if he's okay. And maybe like he would also rather she didn't see him not doing very well. It's one of those smaller, more discreet season 3 moments that very clearly show you that Ben actually has a lot more feelings than he's letting on, and he's actually not as detached or cold as he might seem. Not at all, actually. That's why I say the hints were always there for people who were paying attention. If you look at his face here and his expression, you see a disappointed father who wishes he could mend his relationship with his teenage daughter. You just have to be looking to see it, and I really appreciate this episode for including this moment, especially because the bigger conversation between Ben and Alex, where they say that they used to be very close while she was growing up, and he says that he misses how good of a relationship they used to have, and that makes it clear that they were a very close father-daughter duo. This conversation happens in one of those extra scenes that were released in the DVDs, I think, not as a deleted scene, but like as extra canon material. I actually think this is a super important characteristic of Ben. As an overall character, you know, the fact that he has been a great father to Alex up to this point where she became a teenager and got a boyfriend. And he became very overbearing because of this fear of the pregnancy and death, but without communicating any of that to her. And you know, I think it's important the fact that he actually has been close with his daughter up to this point. He had a very good relationship with her. That's said to us in canon. It sucks that the more overt moment that tells us this is only included in this extra scene, because then some people didn't see it. But this moment, this scene in Stranger in a Strange Land definitely implies the same thing. Because Ben is so crestfallen that Alex totally ignores him, and because he seemed to maybe be expecting or hoping for something else still, it tells us that this is actually a newer development for them. He's not used to her acting like that yet. So it tells us very much that this is not the way that things used to be between them. And it tells us that he is hurt by the crumbling of their relationship. There's even a scene where Isabel, the sheriff, tells Alex, "Why don't you check on your father, sweetheart? I know that he'd appreciate it." And he would appreciate it. We definitely see that he would appreciate it even in the previous episode when he's about to go into surgery. And we see that he wants Alex to check on him because he asks either Juliet or Tom if Alex has asked about him. And Isabel's line here just reinforces that. So yeah, I really appreciate this episode for showing us all of this about their relationship, because we don't get a lot about the relationship in the overall show. Speaking of Ben, this is the episode where we get him shirtless. I am looking very respectfully at him. Very respectfully, but I am looking. Honestly, any episode where he is shirtless in is an automatic 10 out of 10 episode. This could be my only item on the list. Truly, this is actually the biggest positive of the episode, and I will hear nothing of the contrary. Another, maybe more serious positive that I think was done very well in this episode is the dynamic between Ben and Jack, with Ben even making a joke at one point. These are two characters that I do think have a pretty interesting dynamic overall, but towards the end of the show it gets a little more lackluster, I guess, and a little unfair from Jack's part in his treatment of Ben, I'd say. It's like he never totally understands Ben, even at the end when he gets his epiphany about the island and fate. A time when he should have understood Ben and what Ben stood for, and he should have given Ben a lot more grace at that point for how much Ben had helped him. But season 3 in particular is pretty rich between them. Jack is still framed as the main protagonist despite the ensemble cast with a lot of protagonists. And at this point, Ben is framed as the main villain of the story. And by the way, this is actually only and the bit of season 2 that he's part of, the only ones where Ben is actually framed as a villain by the narrative. He's an anti-hero in season 4 and probably 5, depending on how you look at it. And he's going through his redemption arc during both of those. And then he is basically a hero on the same side as the protagonists for all of season 6. And even for some, if not most of season 5. But this is a conversation for a proper full Ben essay. But anyway, yes, in season 3, he is the main villain. A villain who needs Jack to do cancer surgery on him and who claims that he will send Jack home from the island on a submarine if Jack agrees to help him. So there's definitely grounds for very interesting stuff between the two here. I don't love Jack's initial refusal to go check on him post-surgery in this episode, or the surgery sabotage that happened before it. I mean, I like it as a plot point because I think it works really well. I don't like it from Jack's action, because I mean, come on, man, you have a Hippocratic oath. You can't be doing this, and you could have just made a proper deal with Ben instead of like gambling with his life in a really traumatic way for him. Not that he seemed particularly traumatized, I just think that's traumatizing. But you know, that's all besides the point. In Stranger in a Strange Land, we see the aftermath of Ben's interrupted surgery and the fact that the wound is infected and his vitals are kind of low. When Jack comes to talk to him, Ben makes a joke about his bedside manner leaving something to be desired, and it's nice to see more of Ben's dry sense of humor. It's again another facet of him that makes him a better character, a more well-rounded character, and more enjoyable character. But it also gives us insight into how he's used to seeing everything as transactional. Because as soon as Jack offers to help, Ben basically asks what will it cost him now. He doesn't think that Jack is willing to help him just to help, or just because helping him is the right thing to do. And this shows us that Ben has trouble trusting people. And notice how Ben was right. Jack wasn't willing to just do the right thing. The world was constantly reinforcing Ben's belief that he couldn't count on anyone. And later we learned that this started when he was a little boy, because he couldn't even count on his own father to do the right thing for him. So in Stranger in a Strange Land, this is a small but actually not so small moment about Ben that gives us a pretty big insight into how he operates, how he sees the world around him, and it lets us infer a lot about him. If you're a first-time viewer, or at least a first-time viewer paying attention, his comment about what will it cost him should make you curious. Like, I wonder what happened to him to make him think that he always needs to manipulate or make deals in order to get what he wants. There must be a reason why he can't bring himself to trust anyone. So, later, when this tendency is actually explained as a result of growing up with an abusive father, you should be like, oh, of course, I knew that something deeper was going on. And then from Jack's side of this interaction, what I like is that he came in to talk to Ben with a pretty good plan. Jack is someone who tries to do the right thing for the most part, but he can be fairly impulsive, and he gets angry way too easily. I think a lot of the mistakes he makes come from letting anger momentarily cloud his judgment, but not in this episode. Here, when he's trying to keep Juliet from being executed, he comes in to talk to Ben calmly. He is fairly friendly and respectful, and he already lays down the fully formed plan. If Ben stops her execution, Jack will stay with him and tend to him until the infection heals. It's a good moment for Jack, and it's a pretty good interaction between them. Another positive from this episode is that we learn about a rule that the others have. This is just water, by the way, and I do wish the sticky cup had something to do with the theme of the video, but it really doesn't. I just like it. But anyway, throughout the show, we hear a lot about this set of rules. Rules that must be followed by Jacob's people. For example, when Alex dies, Ben is in complete shock, because he genuinely did not believe that she was in any real danger, because killing her was against the rules, and he 100% believed that Whitmore was still gonna follow the rules. You can see in Ben's face how utterly stunned he is. He says that Whitmore should have followed the rules. So yeah, he obviously didn't choose to let her die. He just didn't think she was actually at risk, because he simply had faith that Whitmore would still uphold these rules that they were all meant to live by. These rules seem to be in place for many, many years, as we're told that there have been people living in that society for a very long time. Now, we don't know if these rules come directly from Jacob himself or from some of the original inhabitants picked to be a part of this society many years ago, many centuries ago. Because don't forget that the others are people that Jacob deemed to be special, and he chose them to form his society that protects the island. That's the function and the purpose of the others, protecting the island and its light, the light of creation that is on the island, and by extension, protecting the whole world. Which is why they're initially willing to sacrifice themselves and anybody else to keep the island safe. But again, that's a topic I'll go more in depth in when I make a full deep dive about Ben. For now, the rules. We know that Jacob refuses and has always refused to speak to anyone other than Richard, the advisor. He tells Richard that because he doesn't want to influence anybody. He wants people to choose to be good without his interference. So maybe the don't kill members of our own society rule came from the inhabitants themselves, one of the original leaders or something. But we do know that Jacob himself has instated 2 rules, right? At least 2 that we know of. His lists and the stay on the island rule. We are told that the others receive lists directly from Jacob with names of people that they need to take into their society. And that's why they kidnap some people sometimes. And we're told several times that it's Jacob who doesn't let people leave the island. Ben implies that when Alex asks him why he won't just let the oceanic people go, and he, kind of tired and exasperated, blurts out, "Because I can't, Alex." He can't because it's against the rules. He's not allowed to let them go. He also tells Juliet in one of those extra scenes, the extra canon material. He says that he can't give Walt back to his dad because Jacob wants Walt there in their society with them. That's why they went and took Walt in the first place, because he was in one of Jacob's lists. Then, in the series finale, Ben makes it 100% clear and explicit to anyone who still didn't understand it, Jacob was the one who didn't let people leave. He says this to Hugo. When Ben suggests that Hugo's first act be to take Desmond home, because Desmond wanted to go home, a distraught Hugo points out that the island won't let anyone leave. Ben shakes his head and says, that's how Jacob ran things. Maybe there's a different way, a better way. So it's thanks to Ben that people have freedom to come and go from the island now, mind you, but that's neither here nor there. Just a reminder that he is a hero in the end, and that should be obvious to everyone. But my point here really is that if Jacob decreed and instated these 2 pretty big rules, it makes sense that the other ones came from him too. He didn't want to interfere and influence people unless he did. But regardless of who they came from, these rules, this code of conduct, seems very important to the others. But we don't know what most of them are. We just hear about them like these vague rules. I think that, especially considering their importance, it's nice that we're finally shown a concrete example of one of these rules in Stranger in a Strange Land. The rule being, of course, that if you're an other and you kill one of your own, you are supposed to be executed. The leader seems to be able to override this for a lesser sentence, because that's what Ben does. But this was the first time that we heard one of these concrete rules, I think. Although maybe we had already heard something vague about the list at this point, Jacob's list of names, I'm not sure. But either way, we still knew very little. And I'm always happy to learn more about the lore of Jacob's cult-like society of protectors of the island. So I like that Stranger in a Strange Land gave us a concrete example of at least one of these elusive rules. Although Lost never showed us the other's Sheriff Isabel again, which is a fair complaint about this episode never really having any future relevance on the plot and feeling almost like its own standalone thing. It's also important to note that the others had their own law system going on. And yeah, the law follows Jacob's rules, but there is law enforcement there to enforce the rules. Even though Isabel is not a literal sheriff, like Tom points out at some point, she serves that role for them in some kind of way. Also, this episode is important because it shows us that everyone is upholding those laws by going along with the execution and then the branding of Juliet after she killed one of them. You don't see anyone protesting or even showing that they have a problem or they secretly disagree with it, except for a teenager. It reinforced to us all that almost all of them take Jacob's rules very seriously. It's not just Ben who is so faithful to these rules, and Ben has other personal reasons for needing to keep things under control too, such as childhood trauma being the reason that he needs to have control in order to feel safe because he didn't have control growing up. And his loyalty comes from Jacob's society being the thing that kind of rescued him from his abusive father. So he's all in on their cause and will not really question their rules at this point. But again, we'll leave that for his deep dive. I keep talking about him, I'm sorry, he's just like my favorite character. But it is interesting to see that Ben, who usually follows these rules so well, actually bucks them here to save Juliet's life because of the deal he made with Jack. Ben writes a note to send to the execution saying that the rules don't apply in this case. But he still can't just do what he wants. He can't just fully pardon her. He has to give her some punishment because apparently even he can't just totally override these old ancient rules, even though he is their leader. Even the one in power has to follow these ancient rules. So my point with all this is just to highlight that none of the others really defy or challenge the rules at this point. They've all been taught to do whatever is necessary to keep the island safe and running smoothly. So I actually think that this episode has a great showing of the mentality of the others when it comes to running the island and how they do that. Like many other things surrounding them, you may initially think that it's just showing you that they're ruthless. But the more pieces of the puzzle you get throughout the show, the more you understand there's way more to it than that. It's way more complex than that. It's like they have to be strict because they can't afford for one of them to have a misstep that's gonna cause the island to be harmed. Because harming the island can mean the end of the entire world if the light extinguishes. The stakes are really high for them. It's not that the others really enjoy hurting anyone or that they're evil. They've just been given this task and they've been taught over the centuries to behave in this way. And it will take Ben some time to heal from this line of cult thinking that was drilled into him, that the island is worth sacrificing everything and everybody and yourself for. And it takes him some time to ultimately be the one other that changes things for the better by aligning with the protagonists. And yeah, Stranger in a Strange Land gives an interesting look at this side of things. One of our first looks at how the others run things and how the others operate as a society. And I think that's a very fascinating early glimpse into them. Another positive is that this episode includes that iconic final scene of Ben being carried then on the boat with people holding umbrellas to shield him from the sun. It's very visually striking, like from a filming perspective. The colors are beautiful. I don't know, it's just a stunning shot and it shows us how much respect and regard a lot of the others do have for their leader. It's nice, I don't know, I just really like that shot. So clearly a lot of the positives of the show, at least in my opinion, surround the character of Ben Linus. But it's not just him. Jack has a good moment of planning, like I already said, and Carl has an excellent line in this episode. It's when Kate asks him what they did with the Oceanic kids that they kidnapped, and Carl flat out tells her, "We give them a better life." It's so good! That whole mystery of why do the others kidnap people? Are they doing something sinister to them? Why are they there? That whole thing was a big thing in the previous seasons. It was a big deal, okay? Ben told us in the season 2 finale that the others are the good guys. I felt that he believed what he was saying, and that made me wait to learn more. While suspecting that maybe they really weren't doing anything super bad. I kind of believed that a little bit. But I don't know how many more of you actually felt the same way when you heard Ben say that, or how many just discredited what he said. Then there's that time when Jack is in one of their cages and he sees that Oceanic stewardess that was also kidnapped having a nice life with the others. That scene already shows us that whatever sinister reason for the kidnapping you had conjured up in your head was probably wrong, because she's healthy, she's safe, she even seems relatively happy, or at least feels okay to live with the others now. That's a reveal in and of itself, showing us the others may not be all that bad. But it's a bit more mysterious still at this point. And then having Carl also say this later in this episode to really drive the point home, that's a big moment. It's a big revelation. It confirms to us that the others are really not as bad as the audience might have feared. They're not taking these kids and these people to hurt them. They intend to give them a better life. Think about it, right? If the kids have to live on the island, which they do because Jacob put them there and won't let them leave, then they have a much more comfortable life being part of the others, with backyards and electricity and a support system, kind of a cult, but still, and food drops and all that. And with this one line, Carl totally demystifies this idea of the others being big bads hurting people. And he flat out tells the characters and the audience that your perception of the others has been wrong all along. It's at least a little bit skewed. There's more to them than you realize, and there are good intentions there, even if the methods for achieving them are bad. It's a huge shift in perspective, and I love it, especially because it confirmed my previous suspicion. Ben doesn't lie as much as people think, guys. A lot of the times he was actually telling the truth, and people just assumed he was not. We had previous hints that the others were not that bad, like I said, and I'm sure a lot of you also picked up on that. But then, if you didn't, this dialogue tells you flat out, and if you had picked up on it, this dialogue confirms that you were right. Because, by the way, Carl was not lying. This kid was super out of it at this moment. He was still coming out of being sort of brainwashed. He's just talking. He's telling the truth. And I think that this line alone really should have made the whole audience have just a little bit more faith in these so-called villains. Kate has a great moment in this episode as well. I always love how she's a person who is so full of compassion. She tries to understand others, not the others, just like other people in general. And one of her main traits that we see over and over is that she never leaves anyone behind. I really admire that. It shows a selflessness and a real care for other people, because she'll even often put herself in danger just to help others. She does that with Ben in season 4 when they're running from bullets and he falls and she runs back to get him. She does that with Claire when she returns to the island to get Claire and bring Claire home and reunite her with her son. And in this episode, even though she just escaped being a hostage to the others without really knowing their intentions, by the way, so that had to be terrifying, she instantly wants to turn the boat around and go get Jack, who is still there. She wants to save him. She doesn't want to leave him behind at all. And it takes Sawyer really putting his foot down to keep that from happening. And I just think it's another beautiful moment that reminds us of how compassionate and brave and just how great of a person Kate is. I also really like her. She's also one of my favorite characters. Another pretty straightforward positive is that we meet Achara in this episode. And she's just a cool person. She has a cool girl vibe. She's beachy, she's stylish, she's always mysteriously talking about this gift that she has. I just think she's fun to watch. If we had to have a random girl show up that was never going to be seen again just to be a random Jack hookup, I'm glad that it was her because she was entertaining. Then another positive thing about this episode is Juliet and Jack have kind of a cute exchange, a cute interaction when he's telling her to soothe her burn mark, her brand with aloe. It's not super memorable to me, so I can't really tell you exactly what happened, but I remember thinking that it was a cute interaction when I watched it. So I'm sure a lot more people out there will find it even cuter and more memorable than I did. It's also kind of interesting to see Alex briefly team up with Jack. That's not something that we get much of later on in the show. And even some of Tom's conversations with him, any unique dynamics that are not as explored in other episodes count as a positive for me here. I just like seeing new interactions between all kinds of characters. Oh, something that is arguably a negative, but it's so funny that it becomes a positive to me, is the knowledge of this thing makes the episode really funny and campy. It's the meaning of Jack's tattoo. The real meaning of Jack's tattoo, or rather Matthew's, is really not what the show claimed it is at all. Because yeah, if you didn't know, those tattoos are the actors' real tattoos. The show decided not to cover them up in the pilot and hinted at them being a significant plot point instead. This specific tattoo that we're talking about in this episode consists of 4 Chinese characters. So they're like words. They have specific real meaning in real life. But the show decided to totally ignore that and make up their own translation, as though those aren't actual words in a real language. It's like if Matthew, the actor, had a tattoo saying Je t'aime, which is I love you in French, but then the show totally disregarded that it means that in real life and decided to say, oh, his Je t'aime tattoo means he walks amongst us, etc. And that's honestly maybe a little bit culturally insensitive. That's not so much the funny part, that's just really bewildering to me that they did that. But what makes it extra funny is what the tattoo actually means in real life. Apparently, those 4 Chinese characters put together roughly translate to eagles strike the wide sky, or eagles cleave the air, or even eagles attack long sky. Eagles attack long sky. So I think it's so funny to rewatch the episode, especially the flashback, with this in mind. And taking this as the real meaning instead, like the canon show meaning, pretend that this is it. Keep the eagles in the wide sky in your mind while you're watching. Because you're watching this whole thing about how this mystical tattoo will say something so meaningful about who Jack really is inside. It will define him. It will reveal his inner truth. And the meaningful inner truth revealing sacred information about Jack is eagle attack long sky. And then in the end, Isabel's like, oh, I know what your tattoo says. He walks amongst us, but he isn't one of us. And then Jack just goes, that's what it says, but that's not what it means. It means the eagles strike the wide sky. I can't even explain why I find it so funny, but it elevates the episode to a campy level if you pretend that this is what the tattoo means. Because it is! Oh my god, I should put a sky in the background of the thumbnail of this video with like a little eagle on it. Also, I guess this needs to count as a positive, because I hear people nowadays sometimes say, why did they dedicate a whole episode to Jack's tattoo? Like, who cares what that means? But apparently, from the admittedly very little bit of research I did, it's not even research, it's just a couple random people who I happened to see saying that on Twitter over the past few years. Apparently, back when the show was airing, people did care. They did want to know the meaning of Jack's tattoos. The show brings attention to the tattoos early in season 1, apparently on episode 6, when Kate remarks on them when the two are kind of flirting. The thing is, the scene absolutely sets up the tattoos as this big mysterious thing, because Jack gets quiet when she asks, and he gives this vague, cryptic answer, heavily implying that there's some big personal story behind the tattoos that he's not willing to share. So of course people latched onto it as an important thing. The show wrote it in as a big mystery to be explained someday, so yes, it's a good thing that they explained it someday. Otherwise, people would feel totally cheated out of an explanation. And the previous scene of him being all cagey about the tattoo would end up being for nothing at all, and meaningless, and it would just be out of place. If they decided to set up that conversation with Kate and open up the mystery in season 1, then there had to be a payoff eventually. Good writing never introduces any concepts or mysteries if there's not going to be a payoff later on. You can argue whether the payoff was good enough, for sure, but they had to explain Jack's tattoos. Not just for the payoff, to be honest, but if people wanted it, then it's a positive thing, in my opinion, that the show actually gave the people what they wanted and provided them with the answer they were seeking. Because otherwise they'd get mad and call it an unanswered question. People already complained way too much about unanswered questions that the show actually very clearly and explicitly answered. Can you imagine if they just actually never explained the tattoo after making them a mystery? So, I think these are the main positives of Stranger in a Strange Land to me. Is there anything else that you really like about the episode, or you think that it did particularly well? Let me know in the comments. 2. The negatives of this episode. If you're someone who really dislikes this episode, these are probably the main reasons why. And to be fair, I dislike all of these things too. I just think the episode also has its fair share of positives, like we've just been through. And I guess in the end, the positives outweigh or at least equal the negatives, especially because most of the negatives are contained in the flashback. And I think that is a pretty popular opinion, right? Most people say that it's the flashback that is the issue that makes them rank the episode low. A big one is how uncomfortable and borderline out of character it is for Jack to aggressively force Achara to tattoo him, despite her protests that she's not allowed to and doesn't want to. So the whole deal with this tattoo is that Achara claims to see who people are and mark them with a tattoo that defines them. It reveals that person's inner identity. She says that Jack is a leader, a great man, and that that's something that makes him frightened, lonely, and angry. He becomes weirdly obsessed with having her tattoo him with how she sees him. I guess he just really wants her to define who he is with this mystical feeling tattoo. She tells him it's against the culture of her people, and he just does not care at all. So that's already very culturally insensitive and even pretty invasive of him. But the thing is that he gets like verbally aggressive with her, demanding that she tattoos him even though he knows she can't. And he goes as far as to physically grab her and move her towards the tattooing kit. It's very yikes. This is a man a lot bigger than her, grabbing this woman to make her do something that she said she doesn't want to do. And although Jack does have aggressive tendencies and anger issues explored throughout the show, I feel like the scene goes a touch too far in a way that doesn't even really feel like him all that much. Do you guys agree, or do you feel like this was pretty in character for him? Because okay, I don't like the way that he screams at Kate sometimes, for example, but I don't see Jack ever physically grabbing a woman. It literally never happens again in the entire show, and so to me it feels badly written because it's so out of character for him to go that far. It's also very unnecessary. What did that scene accomplish? Literally nothing. It doesn't even tell us anything new about him. We know that he's been feeling adrift, and I get that he's seeing this tattoo as some anchor for how lost he feels, but there's no need for him to go so far to just get a tattoo that supposedly defines who he is inside. The show could have gone about him getting this tattoo in a million other ways. This particular interaction added nothing to the show in terms of lore or character development or even entertainment. It's out of place since it never happens again and it's never addressed again. No one even knows that this whole thing happened. And it's really uncomfortable to watch. So yeah, it's just one scene, but it's a pretty big negative that taints the entire flashback portion of the episode, and it just leaves a bad taste. Another thing that is maybe a negative to some, I know, like I said, that there are people who find the whole premise of the episode bad. Like, why make an episode about the meaning of a tattoo? They just find that whole idea bad. But as I said in my less positive, they introduced the mystery, so they had to pay it off. I do understand though that some people see the premise of the episode as a negative. That's why I'm mentioning it as part of this list. But I think I explained it enough in the previous section why I think it's personally a positive. A big negative to me is actually when we get the explanation of what the tattoo says and what it actually means. The tattoo meaning is meant to serve a specific narrative purpose that works on two levels. But one level is in a very superficial and temporary manner, and the other is just something obvious that we already know. I think that's actually maybe the main negative of the episode. They hype this mystic tattoo up, then the reveal of the meaning actually falls kind of flat. It feels very heavy-handed, but I'll explain all of this better in the next section where we discuss how to actually improve the episode. Before that, real quick, can we say that a negative is that this episode is just a little boring? There are some juicy moments and details that add a lot to certain characters, like we already discussed, but Jack's time on the flashback and even some of the island stuff drags a little. Again, boring on Lost is still better than many other shows in their entirety, but I feel like there was maybe a little too much of Jack just hooking up with Achara and doing nothing. Their romance kind of dragged a bit for me, and there was a bit too much uninteresting back and forth with him and Alex and Juliet and Isabel and Tom. So as much as I liked seeing those new dynamics developing, some of it got a bit repetitive, I guess, and lackluster, and definitely not all of it was compelling to watch or compelling conversation. I don't think we ever even see Isabel again, though maybe we hear that she died when a group of others goes to get the pregnant women, and Jin and Bernard rig things to blow them up. They stay behind when everybody else leaves, like that whole thing. I think they say that she died then because she was with the group that got blown up, or am I actually making this up? Anyway, I guess although Isabel's existence helped us understand the law structure of the others better, and that's a positive, she was also a bit of a dull character that was ultimately pointless for the grander narrative. These are the negatives that I see in the episode. Way less than the positives in terms of quantity, but these are pretty big negatives that kind of affect how you feel about the whole thing. What else do you think this episode did poorly? Is there anything that I forgot? And let's get back to the tattoo issue and talk about it in a little more detail when we talk about how to improve it now. 3. Making this episode better and fixing the main issues. So how can we improve on Stranger in a Strange Land to make it a better episode? First of all, we need to remember exactly what is the deal with this freaking tattoo that I've been talking about this whole time. At one point at the very end of the episode, Isabel tells Jack the tattoo symbols say he walks amongst us, but he is not one of us. Then Jack replies, that's what they say, it's not what they mean. Because they're actually supposed to mean something about him being a leader. Remember that Achara said that to him? So what Jack is basically implying here is that the tattoo signifies he's not one of us common folk, he's a leader to us. So it's the less literal, just the translation meaning of the tattoo, and more of a figurative one of what it means about the inner Jack. Although in the episode, it actually does serve the very literal meaning of saying that he walks amongst the others, but he is not one of them. He is not aligning with them. It is quite literally a description of what is going on with him there. And that's why it feels heavy-handed and falls kind of flat, because we're already seeing it. And this might even make some people not even notice the main picture, the big picture. Because like, it's both, right? It's a literal descriptor of being amongst the others and not one of them. And this is what the Chinese characters literally spell out in the show. And it's the figurative meaning of who Jack is inside, this leader. And this is the more abstract meaning of the tattoo. The not what it says in literal characters, but what it secretly means about Jack's inner self. But it just falls flat, like I said. So how to fix this? Well, make the meaning of the tattoo play a bigger future role and tie it to the candidacy of Jack rather than just the leadership. Let me explain. Like I said, narratively, within this episode, the tattoo served the purpose of informing the audience that Jack wasn't betraying his oceanic friends. Although he was making a deal to stay with the others and to save Juliet and to get the submarine to take him home, he wasn't actually turning his back on his friends. He wasn't actually joining the others. Jack walks amongst them, the others, but isn't one of them. He isn't abandoning the Oceanics to basically become an other or to leave and go home. Like I said before, this is heavy-handed. It's a pretty inelegant way of conveying this message. And it's a bit of a letdown to this big meaning of this tattoo after so much build-up. Because we already know that he's not really aligning with the others. But I get it. It does what it's meant to do within the narrative of this episode. Even though I would argue that it's unnecessary to clarify that to the audience. Since, like I said, I'm sure we all already knew that he wasn't actually abandoning the Oceanics, right? Right? Well, maybe not. People miss the most obvious things regarding character motivation and whether a character has good intentions or not. So maybe the episode actually really did need to tell the audience that Jack wasn't really aligning with the others. And fine, like I said, the tattoo accomplishes this. It does what it's meant to do within the narrative of this episode. Of this one episode. That's two. One episode. The issue with this is that the tattoo was set up even as far back as in season 1 to be this grand revelation about Jack's inner truth. So it doesn't make sense that it only relates to this one moment in his life. One quick moment of his entire life. It is a rather quick and ultimately meaningless moment because he was only aligned with the others, so to speak, for a few weeks and he didn't even get the submarine in the end. The island absolutely needed him to meet Ben because it took both of them and a couple more people to save the world in the end. That's arguably why the island, or Jacob, lets Ben get sick in the first place. Since that idea that the island was displeased with him is actually a misconception that Ben believed in, but it's not the truth of what was happening. But even so the two of them had to meet and Jack had to spend some time with the others. That doesn't mean that the reveal of the tattoo, meaning being that Jack is not another, was particularly compelling or even deep. But okay, Jack tells you that this is what it says, but not really what it means. So what does it really mean according to this episode? The other meaning, the inner truth, less literal meaning of the tattoo, isn't much better either. It means that he's a leader. Wow. Yeah, we know. He's been leading the group since the pilot episode. So it hardly feels like a big revelation or a big payoff. It's not telling us anything new, therefore the reveal doesn't feel worthy of a whole episode building up to it. So really, the tattoo has two meanings, and neither of them feels very interesting. One is obvious, it's only there to reassure the audience and refers to only a very small window of time in his life, so it's not really what it means, like Jack points out, and the other is also obvious and tells us nothing new. The payoff of the mystery is, well, kind of bad. And here is where what I said about the tattoo having a bigger future meaning in a later season comes into play. I really think that Lost should have had a callback to this in season 6, specifically in the scene where dead ghost Jacob talks to all of the remaining candidates, the people picked as possible replacements for his role, and he tells them about them being candidates because they knew nothing about that. In that moment, when Jack hears about this, about having been sort of spiritually marked as a candidate all along, you have Jack realize that that was actually the true meaning of the tattoo all along. He was a candidate. He was walking amongst them, the normal people on the mainland, but he was not one of them because he was always destined to end up on the island. That's what the tattoo actually meant. That's his inner identity that defines him. Not the obvious he's a leader, but an actual secret meaning that Jack and we didn't know about it until season 6. Not that unnecessary, he's not another thing that only related to one moment in his life and therefore didn't fit with the tattoo being that mystical and significant, but rather a meaning that fit his entire life. Both figuratively and literally, this meaning would apply to the tattoo, to the characters read this meaning, and the figurative defines the inner Jack meaning. It fits both. And this is when we, the audience, would realize that the tattoo was mystical and significant all along because it tied to the purpose of Jack's whole life, his whole fate, not just to one moment where he happened to walk amongst them or to his generic leadership abilities. Achara saw his inner self and could tell that he was marked by something spiritual, something mystical. Jacob's touch that made him a candidate to possibly replace Jacob as this island semi-deity figure. That would give Stranger in a Strange Land a much bigger emotional charge and a payoff that would make people actually go, oh my god, how clever that this tattoo was hinting at the candidacy all along. It wouldn't fix everything about the episode that didn't work, but at least it would make it feel like a more significant and important episode that carried actual weight to the main storyline and actually related to it and foreshadowed something pretty big. And to be fair, I think it's possible that this is what the episode is hinting at, that the tattoo is a premonition of his role of candidate. Maybe? Although, the more I think about it, the less likely I find it, because Jack himself never made the connection in the show, so I don't know if the writers did. Maybe in their mind it actually wasn't hinting at the candidacy. But if it wasn't, it should have been. And if it was, it had to be made clearer. If it was hinting at it, or even if it could just be taken that way, like I am taking it that way now. The problem is that nobody in the audience really thinks of the tattoo in relation to the candidate role. Maybe because too much time had passed between the episodes, that was like years and years and years between them, or they just didn't make the connection. You finish episode 9 of season 3 thinking that the tattoo refers, albeit poorly, just to his stint with the others. He's not one of them despite walking amongst them, etc. That's the literal meaning. And you think that it refers to him being a leader in very general terms. That's the more figurative, hidden meaning. Either way, the episode gives you these two meanings for the tattoo. It gives you answers, so you get the sense that the mystery is closed. There's nothing left to figure out, and that makes it so that your brain doesn't really focus on this anymore very much. By the time season 6 rolls around, you really don't connect the tattoo meaning to him walking amongst normal people on the mainland while being destined spiritually to be a candidate on the island, therefore making him not be one of the normal people he's walking amongst. So yeah, to me, this is the key to bettering the episode. When Jacob is telling them about being candidates, around the fire. I really think they should have made Jack realize that that was the real meaning of the tattoo. Right there, right in that scene. While Jacob is talking, you could have had a small flashback to Stranger in a Strange Land and that exchange that Jack had with Isabel at the end, as though Jack is remembering it and connecting the dots. Or you could just have thrown that scene in the previously on Lost just to remind the audience. Or you didn't even have to flashback at all if you didn't want to be so, I guess, explicit with it. Just by having Jack look at his tattoo while Jacob is talking and getting this introspective, oh, I get it now, look on his face, like he's putting the pieces together, you would help nudge people's brains in the right direction so the audience comes to the same conclusion that he, Jack, just came to. Because as it stands, as far as we know, even Jack didn't connect the meaning of his tattoo to his candidacy. So how can the show expect the audience to make that connection? And how can we even know that this is 100% what they intended? I think this is actually one of the very few times where Lost fails in how they either built up or introduced the answer to an old mystery, because it is a bit too vague this time. And that's why it makes me suspect that they didn't actually mean for that tattoo to relate to the candidacy, and I'm reaching by making that connection. But if I'm reaching, then it's even more important to make this a thing. The way to make Stranger in a Strange Land a better episode is to make this a thing. Like I said, this would have given so much weight to the tattoo. As a result, it would make people view Stranger in a Strange Land as a clever episode that was foreshadowing something huge and something that is like the theme of the whole show, the end game of the whole show. It would be signifying Jack's fate that he could never fight. This inner truth that Achara saw in him was that he was marked with this fate that he could never fight. The episode wouldn't feel pointless. The premise wouldn't feel empty if it turns out that Jack's tattoo actually was saying something very big about his true nature and inner identity instead of the superficial meanings that we got. Not just leader, but actual predestined candidate, chosen as special and worthy like everyone else that was inhabiting the island. People might still dislike the episode upon first watch, but once they finished the show and the dots connected, I really think they would see how much it actually worked and tied everything together brilliantly. Not to call my own plot idea brilliant, but you know what I mean. To be honest, even this fix isn't perfect, considering that Jacob only touches Jack well into adulthood. He's not like Ben, who got picked by the island to be the future leader when he was still a child. The sign of that was him seeing the ghost of his mother, by the way, if you didn't know. Or like Kate and Sawyer, who were touched by Jacob when they were still little kids, marking them throughout their whole life. These three characters, Ben, Kate, and Sawyer, were always not one of them. They were always marked as special and walking amongst other people that were not like them. Not Jack though. That didn't happen until way later in his life. Especially because although Jacob could harness the power of the island, I guess, but he wasn't all-knowing. He wasn't omnipotent and omnipresent. So he never fully predicted their actions, I don't think. I definitely don't think that he knew from a person's birth that they were destined for the island. I think it depended more on how they lived their life, and more importantly, if they were in need of a second chance or not. So I don't think that Jacob always had his sights set on Jack, no. But the tattoo is a mystical thing. Maybe it tapped into future energy and figured out Jack's future. Or maybe his trip to Thailand was shortly after Jacob touched him, and he was already marked as a candidate. It would work a lot better if he was touched by Jacob before getting the tattoo. I actually don't know the timeline of this, but it is possible that we might be able to figure that out because Lost did date a lot of the stuff that was happening. If they told us the timeline, it's on Lostpedia, I just didn't check. But either way, regardless of specific timeline, I still think a callback to the tattoo in season 6 would have made everything a lot better. By the way, I came up with this little fix myself. I don't know if anyone else has ever suggested the same thing. I haven't seen it anywhere. I have never really read much about this episode, or at all, really. If you've ever seen this suggested elsewhere, it's just that great minds think alike. But yeah, this came 100% from my mind alone. Now, of course, there are things in the actual episode that you could change to make it better. More importantly, make Jack not be so weirdly aggressive and creepy to Achara in the end. him forcing her to tattoo him was just bad. Even if we don't do the season 6 callback, what we could do instead is maybe make him convince her kindly, or make the tattoo sacred still, but just not forbidden to outsiders, so that she's happy to tattoo him. There was no in-universe reason, no plot reason to make the tattoo a practice closed to outsiders, at least not that I can think of. So they really just shouldn't have made it be so forbidden. I think it was to make it more mysterious, but it didn't. It just made him act like an asshole. Honestly, any fix I would take, as long as they didn't make Jack act like that, because that was ugly and it really did honestly feel out of character to me. And just removing this altogether would improve the episode and fix one of its bigger mistakes. Because I really think the two big mistakes are this one and the tattoo thing. So just by messing with these two things, it would be an overall greater episode. And then the only other thing would be to make some of those conversations a little less boring, and maybe bring that concept of others not being allowed to kill each other back at some point, so it didn't feel so standalone. But honestly, those are very minor things. I think if you fix the main two big things, the tattoo meaning and Jack forcing Achara, then it would be a much better episode. 4. Final thoughts. So yeah, I hope I made a good case, a strong case, as to why Stranger in a Strange Land is definitely not as bad as you might remember it being. Though it could have been a lot better if only the meaning of the tattoo was revealed to be about the candidacy thing in season 6 and Jack didn't act so weird in it. But at least we had Ben serving us a lot, and we had some other cool moments too, right? A lot of lore building, a lot of stuff like that. And by the way, I'm trying to make a few more casual, shorter videos between the long video essays and deep dives. So I didn't do any kind of research for this. The only thing that I looked at was the transcript for the episode. I skimmed it because I knew that I only remembered Ben's scene and I only remembered his dialogue with certainty, and I wanted to see if I was missing something or misremembering something about something else. Yeah, just to double check everything. And it's good that I did that, because I was forgetting something cool. I didn't remember what Isabel said to Alex, for example, and I didn't remember some of Carl's lines, even that really big one. I didn't. But yeah, what I mean is that this video is meant as more of an opinion-based exploration chat and opinion-based analysis, rather than a big, well-researched endeavor with many interconnecting themes like the Leland Townsend deep dive. Now, as promised, here are a few other Lost episodes that I personally think are worse than Stranger in a Strange Land. I'm not really making a case as to why they're worse, I'm just sharing how I feel. Fire plus Water, in my opinion, is the worst episode in the show, I think. Not only is it weird in an uninteresting way, it feels like it goes in circles, and I hate the cruelty with which they treat someone who's suffering with addiction. They think Charlie relapses and they don't even hear him out, they just treat him horribly. I don't know, it's very unpleasant to watch, in addition to just being a very boring episode. Also, that Locke-centric episode with the weed farm is a flashback. I don't remember the title, I'm sorry, I should have checked. So that episode serves the purpose of reminding us that Locke is always very easy to manipulate and very easy to trick, because he's always so desperate to feel like he is part of something and of a family that accepts him. I get it, the episode does serve this purpose, but it is just a very boring and uninteresting episode to me. Nothing about it I was really compelled to watch. I mean, nothing in the flashback was compelling at all, and even the island stuff was pretty whatever to me. Locke loses his voice and Mr. Echo is in a bear cave. Just, why? I feel like I actually accidentally skipped that episode the first time that I was watching it. I didn't realize it until like 2 episodes later, and I didn't feel like I had missed anything when I went back to watch it, so that's not a great sign right there. It is definitely fair to say that I personally dislike these episodes. I was not entertained by any of them. Actually, I liked seeing Ben as a TSA agent in that one hallucination, but I typically don't like to spend a lot of time in hallucinations, especially when they're so abstract. So yeah, I would definitely say that all these episodes, I was less entertained by them, and they have way less juicy parts than Stranger in a Strange Land. Less interesting conversations or explorations of character dynamics, less lore building or things that we didn't didn't know, all of that. So yeah, they're ranked way lower than Stranger in a Strange Land, in my opinion. And actually, there are definitely other episodes that I don't necessarily wholly dislike, but they do rank lower than Stranger in a Strange Land to me because they entertain me less overall. For example, any episodes in season 5 that were spent entirely in the past when people were living with the Dharma people, or episodes spent too much time aboard the freighter, like with the Desmond, Saeed, Michael stuff. And it's because in both cases, the OG Dharma crew and the OG freighter crew are just so uncharismatic, just unpleasant to watch, really unpleasant with zero charisma. I'm obviously, when I say OG, I'm not talking about, like Miles or Sawyer in Dharma, and I'm not talking about Desmond or Saeed in the freighter. I'm talking about these guys. I don't even remember their names, so I'm just gonna show you them. But yeah, they're not interesting characters. They're honestly annoying to watch and you kind of just want them off your screen. They kind of feel two-dimensional. So yeah, I would much rather watch Stranger in a Strange Land because that entertained me a lot more and had a lot more people that I actually enjoy on my screen than these other episodes. So yes, I would definitely rather rewatch Stranger in a Strange Land and attack the long sky with the eagles than watch any of these that I just listed. What episodes would you say are worse than Stranger in a Strange Land? Either in like an objective way that you think they were done worse, or in a personal, you just enjoyed them less way. I'm very curious to know what episodes you like less. By the way, I have heard the rumors that the writers purposely wrote a bad episode to mess with the network, so the network would allow the show to end in season 6 like the writers were planning. But I don't really know how much veracity there is to this rumor. It kind of sounds like a conspiracy theory made up by fans to explain why they fumbled an episode. Very much like, oh, they would never actually write something bad. They did that totally on purpose. But that's not really the only episode they fumbled, so I'm skeptical. Even if the showrunners or the writers talked about it, which I have no idea if they did, but even if they did, I think I would still have a bit of a hard time believing it, because writers tend to take a lot of pride in their work, as they should, so I don't know that anyone would intentionally tarnish their own reputation and like fumble an episode intentionally. But they might say something like that after the fact to save face when they realize that nobody actually liked the episode. I don't know, really, and that's why I didn't want to discuss the episode from this side of things, because it may very well be just a conspiracy theory. This casual chat took well over an hour. So I'm actually not sure that I will be using the couch ever again. It wasn't as comfortable as I was thinking. But anyways, like I said, I'm trying to think where I make some more casual, shorter, or not necessarily shorter, but just easier videos in between the long video essays and deep dives, because those really involved ones always take me several months to make. These shorter ones should be more opinion based so that I don't have to really write that much of a script, even though I still kind of did. Definitely feel free to suggest some topics that you would like to see me talking about if you have any. I hope you liked this first installment, I guess we can call it, of the more casual chats. Let me know what you think of my idea of how to fix Stranger in a Strange Land, and if you like the episode itself or not, or if maybe you're gonna look at it with new eyes now that you heard about it from a different perspective. The big Ben deep dive thing is still very much gonna happen. It's just gonna be a long time until I can get that done. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you would like to see more from me. Watch my other Lost videos, and I have a couple videos about some other things that Michael Emerson did. And yeah, thanks for watching. Mwah.